Hello, everyone. Bonjour, and welcome to another French GCSE and iGCSE video tutorial. So this video tutorial is all about the subjunctive, so one of the trickiest parts potentially of French grammar. We're going to look at how to use the subjunctive, how to form the present subjunctive, and more. So, my name, first of all, is Dhananjay Talwar. I studied French and Italian for my MA at the University of Cambridge and graduated in 2015. And I've been in the field of education ever since that time. So, for a considerable length of time now. I have learned more than 20 languages myself to different levels, and that includes at least 9 to fluency. So, it is, of course, something I'm very passionate about, something I love to do. And yeah, I love to inspire and motivate my students as well, make sure that they understand efficient ways to learn languages, why language learning can be so useful and fun as well, and help them to get to their goals and target grades. And I've done so already with more than 500 students whom I've helped to achieve or exceed their target grade for French GCSE or iGCSE as a full time tutor. I've taught other languages naturally as well, about 8 of them so far to GCSE or iGCSE level, and a few at higher levels too. So it's been a very rewarding experience. Okay, now these are the French GCSE and iGCSE exam boards. You should ideally know your own exam board. As of August 2025, there are 4 exam boards for GCSE French and 2 different exam boards for iGCSE French. This particular video, though, is about French grammar and potentially one of the hardest parts of French grammar for many GCSE and iGCSE students. And so that means that this video will be relevant for all students, regardless of their exam board. So no matter which exam board you're taking, I recommend you carry on watching. So what is the subjunctive? Well, the subjunctive is a mood as opposed to a tense. That means that the subjunctive reflects the speaker's attitude towards the events described rather than when the events themselves happened. That's a common area of difficulty, understanding what exactly is the difference between a mood and a tense, and understanding that distinction, and also the fact that the subjunctive itself is a mood rather than a tense. So that means that because the subjunctive is a mood, which is a more overarching term, a wider category than a tense, that means the subjunctive can contain different tenses within the subjunctive mood. And in fact, it does have a few different tenses in the subjunctive mood. The other mood that the subjunctive can be contrasted with is the indicative mood. And pretty much all students of French will start off with learning the tenses in the indicative mood first, generally starting with the present tense, which is actually, to give it the full name, is the present indicative tense, the future indicative, the conditional indicative, the imperfect indicative, perfect indicative, and so on. So all of those are tenses that exist in the indicative mood. And in theory, all of those tenses could potentially exist in the subjunctive mood as well. So there could be a whole load of tenses to memorize in the subjunctive mood too, just like the indicative. However, in practice, there are 2 subjunctive tenses in French, the present subjunctive and the past subjunctive. So the subjunctive is one of the hardest parts of grammar for French GCSE or iGCSE. It does, however, look really impressive if you can use it correctly. And that's why, it's worth going through the material in this video. We're going to focus on how to form the present subjunctive. So we'll leave the past subjunctive formation for now. Although the past subjunctive is perhaps not that difficult to form. You would put the auxiliary verb, whether it's avoir or être, in the present subjunctive form instead of in the present indicative form, and then add the past participle. So very similar to the perfect tense or the passé composé, but of these 2 subjunctive tenses, the present subjunctive is certainly more common. Okay, so we're going to start off by looking at what triggers the subjunctive, or in other words, when you should use the subjunctive. So some students will be able to master how to form the subjunctive, even though it is one of the definitely the trickier or trickiest aspects of French GCSE or iGCSE grammar. But they will still struggle to know when exactly to use it and when to use it correctly. And there'll be many elements of that they won't be sure of there. So mastering and fully understanding when to use the subjunctive and how to use it exactly, if this is something, the subjunctive is something that you want to learn, is definitely worth spending time on. The subjunctive comes after certain triggers. And these triggers generally fall into these categories. So the first category is doubt. If you're expressing doubt, for example, using an expression such as je doute que, then the verb that follows would go in the subjunctive. For example, je doute qu'il sache la réponse. I doubt he knows the answer. If you're expressing urgency or necessity, then likewise the subjunctive should follow afterwards. For example, if you're saying il est important que, it's important that, the verb afterwards should be in the subjunctive. Technically, if it's in the indicative mood, then that's a mistake. So it should be il est important que nous fassions nos devoirs. Fassions is the present subjunctive from faire. You can't say il est important que nous faisons nos devoirs. That's technically a mistake in French. And that translates as it is important that we do our homework. You'll notice that these triggers typically end in que. The subjunctive does normally come after a que. The verb in the subjunctive normally follows the word que. But many students will try and just memorize the rule that every time you see a que, you see the word que, you have to use the subjunctive in French. And unfortunately, it's not that simple. That generalized rule doesn't work. It doesn't hold true all the time, definitely. Okay, so similarly for wishes or desires, you use the subjunctive as well. So if you're saying je voudrais que, for example, I would like that. So you'd say je voudrais que tu viennes à la fête. I would like you to come to the party, and not je voudrais que tu viens à la fête. So vienne is the present subjunctive of the verb venir. If you're expressing emotion, any range of emotion, you would use the subjunctive. If you were to say, I'm happy that, je suis content que, or je suis contente que, that would be followed by the subjunctive. For example, je suis content que tu apprennes le français, or je suis contente que tu apprennes le français. I'm happy that you're learning French. Apprendre is the present tense of apprendre. If you're expressing possibility to, that will take the subjunctive. For instance, il est possible que, it's possible that. So you'd say, il est possible qu'il soit trop tard, for example, meaning it's possible that it's too late. Soit is the present subjunctive from the verb être. Likewise, if you're expressing a purpose, you should use the subjunctive as well. One example is the expression pour que, in order to. So you could say, for example, j'ai fini ton travail pour que tu puisses te reposer. I finished your work so that you can relax. The verb after pour que, which is here is puisse, is in the subjunctive mood and not the indicative mood. This is the subjunctive from pouvoir. And there are various other triggers as well. One particular example, which is quite common actually, that triggers the subjunctive is bien que, but there are many others too that do not necessarily fall into any of the other categories. It is, of course, somewhat arbitrary how you split up or define these categories, and there will inevitably be some triggers for the subjunctive that do not fall nicely within those categories and just have to be learned separately to a large extent. So bien que means although or even though, and that will be followed by the subjunctive. So you'd say bien qu'ils aient beaucoup de problèmes, ils sont heureux. Even though they have many problems, they are happy. Et, that's the present subjunctive from avoir. Okay, a few more notes on the subjunctive. That was quite a thorough look at all of the different categories that can trigger the subjunctive. And after all of those, if it is a phrase that triggers the subjunctive, then the verb that comes afterwards must go in the subjunctive mood and not the indicative mood. It would be wrong to put it in the indicative mood, technically. Here are a few more notes, though, a few more details on using the subjunctive mood. So the verb in the subjunctive does always come after que. The vast majority of the time, it will come after the word que in French. but not every que triggers the subjunctive. There are also a few instances where you could find the subjunctive after the word qui in French. And as I said, many students will try and just generalize that rule. And every time they see the word que, they will put the subjunctive mood, the verb. Afterwards, they would put it in the subjunctive mood instead. But that doesn't unfortunately work because there are quite a few examples where the verb after the word que should not go in the subjunctive, but in the indicative mood. So the subjunctive pretty much always comes after the word que, but not every que triggers the subjunctive. For example, you would say je crois que c'est correct. You wouldn't say je crois que ce soit correct. So after je crois que, even though it ends in que, you still have to use the indicative, not the subjunctive mood. If you're saying I think that or I believe that, you're not really expressing doubt, I suppose, and so that triggers the indicative, not the subjunctive mood. If you're saying I don't believe that or I don't think that, that would be followed by the subjunctive mood in French. So je ne crois pas que or je ne pense pas que, that would be je ne crois pas que ce soit correct, for example. Another rule which is quite tricky and which trips a lot of students up is that the subjunctive can never be used if there is no change in subject. This will likely take quite a bit of practice, especially if it's something that is new for you and you're discovering for the first time. So, for example, je veux aller en France, meaning I want to go to France. Aller, that is the infinitive. You can see that's the infinitive form rather than the subjunctive. And the reason why is because the subject of both of the verbs here in this sentence is the same. So I am the person doing the wanting, and I am also the person who would go to France. So the subject of both verbs, both the verb vouloir, to want, and the verb aller, to go, is je, or I. And because the subject of both verbs is exactly the same, you cannot use the subjunctive. You'd simply use an infinitive construction like this in French instead. On the other hand, if there is a contrast or a change in the subject meaning the person or thing doing the action of the verb, then you have to use the subjunctive in French. As long as one of those categories mentioned before has been triggered. So if you were to say, I want you to go to France, that does trigger the subjunctive mood. So you'd say, je veux que tu ailles en France. So I is the present subjunctive from aller. You can see that the subjects of both verbs are different too. So je veux, I want, I'm the one doing the wanting, but you would be the one who goes to France. So the subject goes from I, in I want, to you go. And therefore you do use the subjunctive because there is a contrast or a difference in the subjects of each verb. Okay, so now we're going to look in a bit more depth at how to form the subjunctive. Knowing how to use it is one part. That tends to be actually the hardest part for many students. But of course, if you want to be able to use it in speaking or writing, you need to know how to form it too. We're going to look just at the present subjunctive in terms of formation. The past subjunctive is even more advanced for GCSE level, at least. Many students would not actually get onto the subjunctive at all in school. It tends to be associated with students aiming for top grades, say grades 7, 8, or 9. Perhaps even just 8 or 9. But for that reason as well, even if you say memorize key phrases with the subjunctive, if you are able to throw in the subjunctive correctly in any way in your speaking or writing, then it can come across as very impressive to examiners. So this is how you form the present subjunctive for regular verbs. There are irregulars that I'll show you as well. But for regular verbs that do follow the normal pattern, the stem or the first part of the word comes from the il ou elle, the they form of the present tense of the verb, and just taking off the ending, the ent ending. For a verb like parler, for example, to speak, the they form in the present tense would be il ou elle parle, ending, so parlent. You'd remove that ending ent, and that gives you your stem, PARL. Then you would add the correct ending for the present subjunctive. Those are quite simple, and those present subjunctive endings remain the same for every single verb in this present subjunctive, even if it's an irregular verb. So the endings would be E, ESE, IONS, IEZ, ENT. So probably fairly easy to memorize. And of course, it's essential to remember all of these endings if you want to use the present subjunctive. They're also the same for all verbs. So an example I've given below is that of parler. You take the they form of the present tense of the verb, which would be il parle or elle parle, meaning they speak or they're speaking. And you remove that last ent to get the stem, which is parl. And then you would add on the appropriate ending, depending on the person of the person that you need. And of course, you put the subject pronoun in front. So if you want to create the je form in the present subjunctive, that would become je parle. Parl was the stem. We've added the appropriate ending for the je form, which is the first one, just the letter e. And of course, you've put in the subject pronoun just before that too. So je parle is present subjunctive from parler. There are many irregular verbs as well, though. These do have to be learned separately to some extent. There's no huge shortcut when learning these. The good thing, though, is that the endings remain the same for the vast majority of these verbs, at least. So, yeah, while the stem can be very irregular or very different to what you may expect if you're following those rules for regular verbs, the endings still largely follow the pattern described above. Not completely. There are exceptions, certainly like être and avoir, at least, and a few others. But the endings do tend to be more standardized. So être becomes je sois, tu sois, il, elle, on soit, nous soyons, vous soyez, il ou elle soit. Avoir becomes j'ai, tu es, il, elle, on est, nous ayons, vous ayez, il ou elle est. Faire goes to je fasse, tu fasses, il, elle, on fasse, nous fassions, vous fassiez, il ou elle fasse. Aller becomes j'aille, tu ailles, il, elle, on aille, nous allions, vous alliez, il ou elle aille. Pouvoir becomes je puisse, tu puisses, il, elle, on puisse, nous puissions, vous puissiez, il ou elle puisse. Vouloir goes to je veuille, tu veuilles, il, elle, on veuille, nous voulions, vous vouliez, il ou elle veuille. And savoir goes to je sache, tu saches, il, elle, on sache, nous sachions, vous sachiez, il ou elle sache. So you can see that many of the most common verbs in the language tend to also be the most irregular. If you're struggling with any aspects of the subjunctive at all, then you definitely would not be alone in that. Like I said, it's probably the hardest part of grammar for GCSE, and many students will not go onto it or be introduced to the subjunctive at all in school. And that's why it tends to be associated more with, say, top grades. And so there is an alternative to perhaps learning all of this and mastering the subjunctive, which can be pretty onerous and difficult. That alternative is memorizing key phrases, something that I mention a lot and that I still heartily recommend to students. So key phrases are a great way of boosting your mark, and it's even better because they don't require too much extra effort typically. Memorizing a bunch of, say, 5 to 10 set phrases, some of which already contain subjunctive forms, can allow you to fit in the subjunctive when you're speaking or writing without requiring lots and lots of time to go through your grammar book and to memorize exactly how to form the subjunctive, because instead you're just memorizing these set phrases which already have subjunctive forms within them. You're memorizing them by heart instead. Subjunctive phrases are a great example of key phrases, though there are other key phrases that can be useful too. And of course, these key phrases are particularly valuable for your speaking and writing papers whenever you, as a student, need to produce the language yourself. The subjunctive is perhaps the one most impressive feature of grammar to French GCSE and iGCSE examiners, regardless of what your target grade actually is. Okay, and on the subject of memorizing key phrases, this is a sneak peek at a revision resource, a free revision resource actually, that I've created, which contains a list of my top key phrases for French GCSE and iGCSE based on my considerable experience learning and teaching for French for GCSE and iGCSE. It also has a grammar checklist alongside that, which allows you to track your progress in learning every aspect of grammar for French GCSE and iGCSE. So you can plan your revision. I highly recommend downloading this. But for now, we're going to go on to a quick quiz as well, just to test your knowledge of the subjunctive. So, question one is, what are potential triggers for the subjunctive? There was a fairly long list. I'll give you a bit of time to see how many of those you think you can remember before showing the answer. Okay, let me give a little bit of time, a few more seconds. Okay, and I'll show the answer now. So, the subjunctive is used when expressing doubt, urgency or necessity, wishes, emotions, possibility, and purpose, among other things. There are actually quite a few subjunctive triggers that do not necessarily fall into any of those precise categories. There are many out there, and do take your time when going through and learning the subjunctive, because knowing how to use it can be fairly tricky. Question two is true or false. So the subjunctive is a tense. I mentioned this right at the start of the tutorial. So I'm going to give you a little bit of time to think through this. Now let me show you the answer. This one is false. The subjunctive is actually a mood rather than a tense. The difference or distinction between those two, between a mood and a tense, can be quite tricky to understand as well. A mood is a more overarching category, so a mood can contain various different tenses within it. And a mood indicates that, or shows the speaker's attitude towards what they're saying rather than when it actually happened or happens or will happen. Question three, which is true or false again. The subjunctive is not used when there's no change in subject. Is it true or is it false? Let me give you a bit of time to reflect on it before showing the answer. Okay, I'm going to show the answer now. So, moment of truth, this one is actually true. If the subject of the sentence doesn't change at all, then the subjunctive would not be used. Usually you'd simply use an infinitive structure instead. In French, you have to use the subjunctive when there is some change in the subject being the person or thing doing the action of the verb. And question four, lastly, how can memorizing key phrases benefit students for French GCSE and iGCSE? They would benefit potentially all students, I would say, French GCSE or iGCSE. So I'll give you a bit of time to think over this. Let me show the answer then. So some French grammar, like the subjunctive, can be tricky to master. Memorizing key phrases which already contain subjunctive forms can therefore be very beneficial for students instead. Because instead of learning all of the rules and patterns associated with the subjunctive, you're simply memorizing some set phrases, a bunch of set phrases that contain subjunctive forms or that can contain them instead. So you're still able to fit subjunctive forms into your, say, speaking or writing papers, but without having to memorize the intricacies of how to form and use the subjunctive, so to speak. Okay, so if you have any questions about any of that, or if you'd like to know more about more personalized help, which I do offer as well, you can get in touch by email, through Facebook or Instagram. And I do post on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn every single day with a lot of advice to do with GCSEs and iGCSEs, how you can make a revision plan, how you can maximize your grade, make language learning more efficient. And I post a lot about languages more generally and my passion for them too, how to motivate yourself to learn languages, how you can use them as beneficially as possible, and so on. I have many resources available. I showed a sneak peek of one earlier for French GCSE and iGCSE, including free resources. And I have a Facebook group for French GCSE and iGCSE students and their parents, where I offer even more tips, masterclasses, and more, which can be joined for free. I do one-to-one classes, group classes, courses, and more too. So don't hesitate to get in touch if you'd like to know more about any of that.